When John Bolton speaks about war planning, the world listens, not because everyone agrees with him, not because he is popular, but because this is a man who sat inside the most powerful national security apparatus on earth. A man who was in the room, a man who saw how decisions were made, how plans were built, and how presidents either prepared for the consequences of their actions or walked blindly into them. And right now, John Bolton is saying something that should make every person paying attention to the Iran situation stop and take this very seriously. He is saying there is a real problem with how the Trump administration is planning or failing to plan for what comes after any military action against Iran. Not a small concern, not a minor procedural complaint, a real problem. Those are his words. And coming from a man with his background and his history of supporting aggressive American foreign policy, those words carry a specific and significant weight. This is not a liberal critic attacking a conservative president. This is not a political opponent looking for a headline. This is one of the most hawkish, most pro-military actional security voices in the entire American political establishment, saying that the people currently in charge of planning one of the most consequential potential military engagements in recent history are not doing it right. If you have not subscribed to this channel yet, do it right now, because this channel is where the deeper story gets told. Not just what was said, but what it means. Not just who spoke, but why it matters. Subscribe and stay with this, because the details of what Bolton is specifically criticizing reveal something about the current state of American national security decision-making that is deeply important to understand. John Bolton served as National Security Advisor to Donald Trump from 2018 to 2019. He left that position under circumstances that were tense and public. He later wrote a book that was deeply critical of Trump's decision-making style, and yet even after all of that, Bolton has consistently supported a hardline approach toward Iran. He has never been shy about his belief that military pressure on Tehran is necessary and justified, which makes his current criticism not easier to dismiss, but harder. To understand why Bolton's criticism lands with such force, it is necessary to understand what proper military and strategic planning actually looks like at the highest level of government. Because this is not about whether to act. It is about what happens after the action, and that distinction is everything. History has taught the United States some of the most expensive lessons imaginable about the difference between winning a military engagement and managing its aftermath. Iraq in 2003 is the example that never goes away. The American military defeated Saddam Hussein's conventional forces in weeks. The tanks rolled into Baghdad. The statue fell, and then the chaos began, because nobody had built a serious, detailed, executable plan for what came next. No plan for governing, no plan for the security vacuum, no plan for the sectarian tensions that everyone with regional knowledge knew would explode the moment the old structure collapsed. The result was years of insurgency, thousands of American lives, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives, trillions of dollars, and a destabilized Middle East that is still dealing with the consequences of that planning failure. More than 2 decades later, Bolton watched all of that. He was part of that era of American foreign policy, and whatever criticisms exist of his own judgment and his own record, he understands better than almost anyone outside a small circle of insiders what the difference looks like between a military action that is strategically prepared and one that is driven by momentum, political pressure, and the intoxicating certainty that the initial strike will be clean and successful. And what he is seeing right now in the Trump administration's approach to Iran is making him uncomfortable enough to say so publicly. That is significant, because Bolton does not raise alarms casually. He does not perform concern for the cameras. When a man of his disposition and his record says there is a real problem, the specific nature of that problem deserves very careful examination. The core of his criticism centers on something that sounds technical, but is actually very simple. What is the objective? Not the military objective, not the target list, not the aircraft and the missiles and the battle damage assessments. The strategic objective, What does America want Iran to look like when this is over? What government, what behavior, what relationship with its neighbors, what posture? Subscribe to this channel because the answer to those questions, or the absence of answers, is exactly where Bolton says the real problem lives. Because here is the uncomfortable reality that Bolton is pointing directly at. Striking Iran is one thing. Every military analyst with access to honest assessments of American capability will tell you that the United States has the firepower to hit Iran very hard. The targets are known. The aircraft are positioned. The missiles are ready. From a pure military execution standpoint, the strike itself is the easy part. What comes after the strike is where everything either holds together or falls completely apart. Iran is not a small country. It is not a weak state with a fragile population and no capacity to absorb punishment and respond. Iran has a population of nearly 90 million people. It has a government that has survived 40 years of sanctions, isolation, internal pressure, and external military threats by building resilience into every layer of its system. It has proxy forces spread across Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and beyond. It has the ability to respond to a military strike, not just directly, but through a dozen different channels simultaneously. In a dozen different countries against a dozen different targets, including American allies and American interests across the entire region. A strike on Iran does not end with the strike. It begins with the strike. And what begins is a chain of consequences that requires an extraordinarily detailed and serious plan to navigate without stumbling into something far larger and far more destructive than what anyone intended to start. Bolton's point is that the planning he is observing does not reflect that level of seriousness. That the conversation inside the administration appears to be more focused on the action itself than on the strategic architecture that needs to surround that action to prevent it from becoming a catastrophe. And this criticism comes at a moment when the military pieces are very visibly moving into place. The A-10 Warhogs, the Apache helicopters, the naval assets, the repositioning of forces across the region, all of it signals that the military option is not theoretical. It is being actively prepared, which means the window for getting the strategic planning right is not open indefinitely. It is closing, and Bolton is essentially standing at the edge of that closing window and shouting that the work is not done. This is not about being for or against military action. This is about the difference between a surgeon who operates with a full understanding of the patient's condition and a clear plan for recovery, and one who picks up the scalpel because the situation feels urgent and figures out the rest as it goes. And the stakes of getting this wrong are not abstract. They are not theoretical concerns debated in think tanks and forgotten by morning. They are real, they are immediate, and they connect directly to the lives of ordinary people in ways that stretch far beyond the borders of Iran or the United States. Consider what a poorly planned military engagement with Iran could trigger in the space of just 72 hours. Iranian proxy forces in Lebanon activate Hezbollah, which has spent years quietly building one of the largest non-state missile arsenals in history, begins launching into Israel. Israel responds. The conflict that was supposed to be contained to a specific set of Iranian nuclear or military facilities has now pulled in. The entire northern front of the Middle East within 3 days. Simultaneously, Iranian assets in Iraq begin targeting American military personnel still stationed in that country. The Iraqi government, caught between its relationship with Washington and its deep economic and political ties to Tehran, is paralyzed. American soldiers are dying not in Iran, but in Iraq, in Syria, in locations spread across a region that has just been set on fire by a chain reaction that started with one strike that did not have a serious plan behind it, and then the Strait of Hormuz closes or becomes so dangerous that insurance companies refuse to cover tankers attempting to pass through it. Oil prices do not just rise, they spike to levels that shock every economy on earth. Countries that have nothing to do with this conflict, that have no interest in American and Iranian tensions, suddenly find their fuel costs doubling, their food supply chains disrupted, their populations angry in ways that their own governments cannot easily manage. This is the scenario that serious strategic planning exists to prevent. Not by avoiding military action necessarily, but by thinking 10 moves ahead. By having answers ready before the questions become emergencies. By knowing what message to send to Hezbollah through back channels before the first missile is fired. By having agreements in place with Iraq about force protection before the situation demands them. By having a coordinated international response to oil market disruption, prepared and ready to deploy. Bolton is not saying, do not act. Bolton is saying, act with your eyes open. Act with a plan that extends beyond the moment of impact. Act like a government that understands the full weight of what it is setting in motion. And his concern, stated publicly and clearly, is that right now, that level of preparation is not visible to someone who has spent his career watching how these decisions get made at the highest levels of American power. So what does this moment actually mean for the direction America's heading with Iran? And why does the voice of someone like Bolton matter enough to take this seriously rather than filing it away as just another political disagreement in a city full of them? It matters because of what it reveals about the internal state of the conversation happening inside and around the Trump administration right now. When a figure who shares the administration's hawkish instincts toward Iran, who has never been accused of being soft on Tehran, who built his entire career on the belief that American power should be projected forcefully and without apology, when that figure steps in front of cameras and says the planning has a real problem, it tells the world something important. It tells the world that even among those who agree on the destination, there is serious disagreement about whether the vehicle is roadworthy enough to make the journey. And in national security terms, that disagreement is not a small thing. The history of American military engagements gone wrong is not primarily a history of bad intentions. It is primarily a history of insufficient planning, of assumptions that turned out to be wrong, of second and third order consequences that nobody modeled seriously because the first order action felt so obviously correct that the work of imagining failure seemed almost disloyal to the mission. Iran is not a mission that forgives that kind of overconfidence. Its geography is complex. Its political structure is layered in ways that outside observers consistently underestimate. Its population is not monolithic. There are Iranians who despise their government and would welcome change. There are Iranians who would rally behind that same government the moment foreign bombs began falling on their soil. Understanding the difference between those groups and building a strategy that accounts for both is exactly the kind of nuanced and difficult work that Bolton is suggesting is not being done with sufficient seriousness. The weapons are in position. The pressure is at levels not seen in years. The rhetoric from both Washington and Tehran has moved past the point where either side can easily de-escalate without losing face. And in that environment, the absence of a serious strategic plan is not just a bureaucratic failure. It is a danger, a real and present danger to everyone in the region and to the stability of a world that is already carrying more instability than it can comfortably hold. Bolton said, there is a real problem. He has been in that room. He has seen what good planning looks like and what the absence of it produces. The world would do well to take those words seriously. Subscribe to this channel, share this video, because understanding what is being said in these rooms and what is not being said may be the most important news anyone can follow right now.